Hello, everyone. We want to welcome you to this recorded conversation between therapists, providers for mental health and pastoral care during this COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to introduce us very quickly. We have Susan. Susan is a licensed counselor. She sees clients at St. John's in Albuquerque, and she is a clergy spouse. We also have Kelly. Kelly is a licensed therapist. She also serves as a clergy member of Central UMC in Albuquerque. And then I am Ashley. I am a licensed therapist and a clergy spouse as well. So we're all associated with the church in some way. And so we understand your concerns. We understand what you're going through, and that's why we wanted to have this conversation to kind of help you through this process. What started as a sprint, maybe a couple weeks, has become a marathon. We don't know when we can reopen. We know there are some small reopenings happening around the state, but not enough for a lot of us to really begin meeting again as a congregation. And also it's tiring, it's exhausting, running a marathon. So we want to help you with some skills and some resources that can be helpful to you. And we're all carers of other people. We take care of other people as therapists, as pastors. And so when we're taking care of other people, it can be very draining on us. And so if we're not taking care of ourselves, we might have a hard time really being there for other people. And so we're just going to have a conversation about boundaries, about self-care, and give you some resources to help you through this time and transition. So I'm going to hand it off to Susan, who's going to talk a little bit about boundaries.
So thanks, Ashley. What we wanted to talk about here is that as we've entered into this time, not knowing what was coming in the future, I'm hearing that a lot of clergy have taken on far more work, are far busier than they ever were before this all started, and they were already busy. So this amount of increased work that we've sort of stepped into, one step at a time, maybe not realizing where we were headed, is hard to manage. And maybe some clergy feel like they just need to be available to their congregation almost 24 hours a day because everybody's having such a hard time and they care about their congregation so much. If we didn't enter into this time with a plan for how we were going to be available, it may have just sort of happened like, a frog in boiling water, right? That you didn't realize the water was too hot until you were in the thick of it. And in some ways, what's happened is that for those clergy who have sort of been available any hour of the day and are working really long hours, have now trained their congregation that they're always available. And that's what the congregation is used to. And so it can feel difficult to say now, enough, I can't maintain this. But if we trained them to expect us to be available as often as we have been, then we can also train them that we have boundaries. So one thing you may want to do as you consider sort of setting up boundaries for yourself is to figure out what your boundaries need to be. So without considering what feel like current limitations, ask yourself what an ideal boundary might look like for you. And your mind is probably going to say, oh, but you can't do that because X, Y, and Z. Well, forget that. Just set that aside for a little bit and think, if I were starting from scratch, knowing what I know now, how many hours do I want to work per day? How many days do I want to be available? And to sort of have that to be an ultimate goal. And once you've got that idea, that ideal boundary in your head, of course, we can't just start doing that, right? Acknowledging that a sudden boundary change might meet with some resistance. We want to talk about what you might be able to do to communicate what your needs are to your congregation. So I think most important there is to be clear on the why. Why is it important for you or anyone to have boundaries, to take care of yourself, to not overwork? And a couple of whys that occur to me, one is that if you go to them and you say, I've done too much, I took on too much, I need to take care of myself. I think what you do when you communicate that is that you're modeling healthy self-care to your congregation. You're showing them what it looks like to do something that's good for yourself. Maybe they've done the same things with their work, and they need to see you do that so that they have permission to do it themselves. I think you could also look at scriptures that emphasize the importance of the Sabbath and think about how you can make this a spiritual habit as well as a personal one. You may have your own reasons why it's important to you to have boundaries. Maybe you have family at home that have not been getting the attention that's needed. Maybe you just realize that you're burning the candle at both ends and that it's not sustainable. So be clear on the why for yourself, but also in your communications with your congregation. I think it's important to have a conversation with your SPRC or PPRC, to maybe talk with the chair first, and just let them know where you are. Maybe you've already been doing that, but if you haven't been, bring them into the loop and ask for their support in giving you this kind of space. You might consider if there are staff in your church that might be able to share the load with you. Now, I realize there are quite a few clergy who are in churches that don't have staff, and so you don't have that option. But if you do have support staff, now is the time to assess with them what their workload is. They may be just as overworked as you are, but to see if there's a way that some of what you've taken responsibility for can be shared with someone else. Similarly, there may be lay people who have that heart for ministry, who have who really want to support you, and they may be able to provide pastoral care to each other, those kinds of things. So think about who you're surrounded by in your congregation that might just be waiting for a chance to take on something to help you. I think it's important also to consider different ways that you might share the message about your boundaries. So if you have a newsletter, maybe writing an article about what you've realized during this time and what you realize your needs are, or however you communicate with your congregation. You might mention it in your online worship. So finding ways to verbally, proactively share the information, but also consider strategies like having an auto reply message on your email, or I know that there's a way to do that on text messages as well, so that you can say, I'm in your auto reply message, I'm taking a Sabbath, I'll respond to messages at such and such a time, realizing that when somebody sees that reply, it's again another chance to model what it might be like to set healthy boundaries. And then also consider that you don't have to be available 24 hours a day. So look to others in the church or the resources that Ashlee's going to share so that congregation members have someone to reach out to other than you when they're struggling. So I want to stop there and see if Kelly or Ashlee have anything they'd like to add to that from their own experience as we think about this topic of boundaries. Kelly, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. I was just going to say, I think when considering boundaries, when we were in the kind of COVID world, although we were not great, I think anyone working with people and have that heart and that call are not great at boundary setting to begin with. But before, at least we had an office. We had some sort of physical space that we presented in, where there was a door you shut, a door you opened, and that place you existed in. And now we don't have that. So we were kind of tossed into this world and just went on this sprint. Now we're in this marathon, and we really got used to trying to figure everything out at one time. It's like we felt like we had one day to get all of this perfected for ourselves. So we had no boundaries. We had no physical boundaries. We had no sort of sense of boundaries. We were, calling congregation members, calling people, trying to get support. And because of that, we kind of lost track. I really believe we lost this sense of space and this sense of time. Therefore, boundaries that were already blurred or even worse. So the importance, and like you said, of coming back to that and saying, okay, here's my office hours. And yes, I'm at home, you're at home, we're all at home, but these are my office hours, and I'm going to stick to those. And there are places you can call, and I know we're going to talk about that, for emergencies, and that may not be me. So we need to really rein that in again, and let's talk about what boundaries are. Because at this point, and really at any point, if you don't have some sort of sense of what that is, you can really lose yourself in that whole process, and you will not be any help to anyone, yourself or others included.
Yeah, Kelly, that's really important. And it reminds me, I telecommute to a job that is not in the church as well, in addition to being a counselor. And a lot of us have been overworking as well. And a piece of advice I've been hearing is that it's important to have physical boundaries as well as sort of time boundaries, right? To have a place in your house that you set up your laptop and you do your work. And then when you're done with that, you shut down the computer and you put it away so that there's not a notification going off reminding you to check your email or those kinds of things. So boundaries can happen in lots of ways, and it's important to consider what yours need to be.
I think it's important, when I think of boundaries, I want to address the guilt that we feel, right? When we don't answer a call, when we don't answer a text, when we don't answer an email. And I know for me, I have office hours, and sometimes I receive calls for my office outside of those office hours. And I think, oh, well, I'm just sitting here, right? I'm not doing anything. I can call this person back, or yeah, I'll just answer it. I'm only watching TV or whatever it is. But it's still, we still need to have that boundary. It doesn't, even if you are sitting around not doing anything, that's rest. And you need that rest and you need that time. And maybe you're sitting next to your spouse or your children, and they need to know that you're present with them. And so it's uncomfortable, and it takes getting used to kind of shut down and say, okay, I'm off now, and someone else. And that's why it helps if you have someone else, if you can have another staff member or a lay person who you trust with this job, that you feel better. Oh, well, then they know that they can call so-and-so, and it feels better. It's almost like when you have a new baby and you're trying to sleep, and if oh, well, so-and-so, it's so-and-so's night, right, to get up and to feed the baby, then you sleep better, because you're not worried about it. And so I feel like it's important for you to have that person or people, and that can help alleviate that guilt that you might feel when you're not answering a phone call or a text message or an email.
Mm-hmm. And I think, that's where an auto reply can be super helpful, because if you have a nicely, gently worded auto reply, that somebody is getting an immediate response. And potentially in that auto reply, you could even include some resources of, here's who you can call, here's where you can get help if you need it. And that way you're not leaving somebody hanging. You've given them some information. You have reached back out, even if it was kind of virtual.
Great.
Any other thoughts on that topic? All right. Well, let's move on to what you might want to do once you've set those boundaries and you actually have some time to take care of yourself. Kelly's going to share some information about self-care, which, of course, you already know, right? But a good reminder can't hurt.
I was just going to say, we know what we need to do, right? So we know the things I'm going to be talking about, These are things we have been told repeatedly. And so I encourage people, if you're not doing these things, take a deeper look, take that deeper dive to really look at why you're not doing these things. So I'm going to be putting these in a framework called the 5 C's. This is something I know I learned in graduate school and have recently learned. That was a long time ago, so they're not necessarily teaching this anymore, but I still find it very, very helpful. It's very concrete, this concrete way to really embed this wellness into our everyday. So the first C is this idea of control. And we like to have control. And I know we like to schedule our days. We like to say this is where we're going to be when. And this that's been happening has really shifted all that in so many ways. So for that first C, kind of an exercise to do, I want people to write down 2 lists. One is 5 things you have control over. The other list is 5 things you have no control over. One of those things is how you behave in public. I know the big thing now is wearing a mask. I have control if I'm going to wear a mask or not. I have no control over the person 2 aisles down at the store if they're wearing a mask or not. I also have control over how I'm going to react to that person wearing or not wearing a mask. So kind of list those things out for yourself. I have found it very helpful, especially these days when I can say, yeah, I have no control over how my 11-year-old is going to react at 10 a.m. this morning. I don't have control over that. I have control over how I will react to her. So those 2 lists I have found just very helpful and very grounding. The second C is care. This is that self-care piece that we are also familiar with. Going to sleep and waking up around the same time, finding that rhythm with your sleep pattern is so helpful. Sleep, as we know, there's so much research that goes behind sleep, the science of sleep. That's when your brain gets to rest. So that is when it stores memories. That's when it works through things and it gets to rest. So sleep, so very, very, very important. Eating all that food that we put into our bodies. I think it's fine to have a cookie. It's fine to have a piece of cake. But if that's all you're eating, that's not so fine. So make sure you're getting what you need. Your body is hungry and it needs some good food to fuel it. The second part is exercise, or the third part, shall I say, is exercise. Make sure you're getting out. I think this is hard, sometimes complicated for us when we feel like we're just in our homes, but we're really not. You can go on a walk outside. We're so lucky really in this entire state that we have such beautiful weather. It gets a little windy in the afternoon, but try to go in the morning, try to go in the evening. Go on a walk, do something, get out, get some exercise, stretch. And then the last one is really limiting your social media. There's been a lot of research out there lately around social media, people who consume a great deal of it, which is 2+ hours a day, seem to display more symptoms of depression and anxiety. Not sure which comes first. The research seems a little back and forth on that. If you're on social media a lot, it causes these things. Or if you are experiencing depression, anxiety, you go on social media more. It's hard to say, but the evidence is still there. If you're on social media quite a bit, you're going to kind of display some of these symptoms that you really don't want to display. So what I've always appreciated, I have an iPhone, I'm sure this exists for other platforms, is it tells you how many hours you have spent on social media. And it'll even separate it out, how much time it's email, how much time it is things like Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever. It'll tell you those things. And I challenge all of you to look at that as well. So the next C, so that's the self-care, and I could go on self-care for a very long time. The next C is this continuity piece. It's that rhythm. It's that finding that sleeping at the same time, waking up at the same time, finding moments in your day when you're eating, when you're exercising, when you're doing work, going back to those boundary pieces of this is when I'm going to do work. These are the hours I'm going to do Zoom conferences or talk to clients, those pieces. So find a rhythm in your day that is so helpful, especially these days when days can kind of blur together weeks can kind of blur together. So find a rhythm, find a schedule for yourself. The next C is creativity. It's so important to be creative. I've heard people say, you know, I'm not a good singer, but I like to sing, but I'm not going to sing because I'm not good. It doesn't matter. It's that idea of singing, of creating artwork, you know, not asking for you to finish that, opera you're trying to finish and that it should be perfect and you should be able to sell it, but to work on that creative piece of yourself is so very important. Art, gardening, music, any of those things. Be creative. Our spirits, our souls, our bodies are meant to be creative. Do that. The last one is the compassion. It's that last C, it's that 5C, and that's having compassion for yourself and for others. Again, in this career, when you are a clergy or you're working in mental health as a therapist, as a social worker, we are so good at giving to everyone all the time, and we leave ourselves out. It's that old thing we're always told on the airplane, you know, you need to help yourself before you can help others. It's a little counterintuitive for us, but so very, very important. You have to care for yourself as well as others. And if you're not doing all of these things, you're going to kind of have a hard time. I think that burnout is going to catch up with you. I think all of those kind of negative parts are going to catch up with you. But keeping that control piece, keeping those two things in mind, keeping that care piece in check, keeping a rhythm, that continuity, being creative, and having that compassion for yourself and for others. I was recently talking to someone and they said, all these people on Facebook seem to be saying they deep cleaned their house and they got rid of all this stuff and they feel so good and everything's so wonderful, and I have done nothing. And they were feeling guilty. I said, no. You need to feel compassion for yourself. This is not the time to do all these great things. Sure, some people are doing that. Sure, they're posting on Facebook. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But people feel the need to do those things. So whatever. But take care of you and have compassion and love for yourself. We are certainly called to do that. So any questions? I open the floor to my colleagues, Susan and Ashley, if you have questions about these 5 C's or things to add to them.
Yeah, I would add to self-care. Like you said, we could go on and on and on. You could spend hours talking about self-care. There are so many things that you can do. I always tell my clients, I always ask them, what do you like to do? When you're having a hard day, what do you do at the end of that day that helps you to feel better, that's healthy, that's not destructive, that doesn't hurt you or other people, and that's a good starting point. So if you don't know a lot about self-care, if you haven't been one to practice self-care, think about that. What helps me that's also healthy? What gives me helpful thoughts? If I'm having bad thoughts, what can I do, or what do I do that helps? And so that's where you can start. If you don't know where to start with self-care, just start with those things that you do after a bad day that help you to feel better.
Like that.
Yeah.
The natural things we enjoy doing anyway.
Yeah, and learning new skills. Learning new skills has really been proven to help with resiliency, right? That bouncing back after a hard time. And so maybe there is something that you've wanted to learn how to do. And maybe you have, once you set those boundaries, then you will have a little bit of time to be able to learn that new skill. I've been wanting to learn to make macarons. And I have all the stuff to do it, but I just haven't done it yet. But I got all the stuff, right? So that's one step forward. And you might have to take some baby steps like that, to get into that rhythm of doing it.
Well, and I like the reminder, Kelly, of the care, of taking care of our physical needs. Because if we are not getting enough sleep and we're not well hydrated and we're not taking in the kinds of foods that are nutritional to us, if we're not moving our bodies, that puts us in a disadvantaged state that makes it really difficult to have the motivation to make macarons, to paint, or to sing. And so I think that foundational, making sure that we're okay at that level, gives us the room, then the ability to do that next step up. And then creativity is not something you hear a lot when you hear about tips for taking care of yourself during these unusual times, right?
Yeah.
And I think I hear a lot of people say, well, I'm not creative. Well, everyone's creative somehow, right? If you are making something, if you are producing something, you're being creative. And I count in that cooking, right? Even if you're following a recipe, you are uniquely putting together ingredients and producing something that either you or other people are consuming and eating and enjoying. And that is creative, especially if you tinker with the recipe or, play around with the flavors. And things like writing or journaling is also being creative. So expand your definition, perhaps, of what you think creativity is, and figure out what your creativity might be. And I also find that when I hear all these tips, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do all of that. And it's overwhelming. So one thing we're doing as part of this sharing is there's going to be a handout for you to look at how you might assess and create habits for yourself. And we didn't make it. I found it out there in the wild, but I liked it because it sort of breaks down the habit and helps you look at how best you can develop a habit. And it importantly has you look at the why. I think anytime we want to create some new activity in our lives, if we're not clear on why we're doing it and what the benefits are for ourselves, it's very easy for that to turn into a should instead of a get to. And shoulds these days don't feel very good. Yeah. So maybe look at Kelly's 5 C's and pick one thing to try, or maybe pick one out of the 5, because it can just be so overwhelming. Do you have any other thoughts, Kelly? Having heard what we have to say?
I did. No, I appreciate that very much, and your additions to that structure. I think anytime you can find just one thing, be creative in one way, try one recipe, try going to bed at the same time every night, try waking up, do that for, so many days, try that for 1 week. I think habits are built, healthy habits can be built. And I think that's one of them, in eating well, all of those things. But like you said, Susan, it's so easy to be overwhelmed. I think when we go on even a weight loss kind of thing, a change of lifestyle to be healthy, we tend to go full force instead of saying, you know what, I'm just going to try one thing, like not having that cupcake before I go to bed every night. Like, I'm going to try to put that away and do that once a week instead. Those little things. So try the small things to come to this more understanding of well-being, which is not just through this time or this period, this COVID life we are living in, but well beyond, because this is a long-term ministry, working with people, mental health. That is a lifelong process. And so just try one thing and do that and go from there.
Yeah, and I would say that. tell someone what you're doing, mm-hmm. right? Because you're going to be more likely to do it when you say the words out loud to someone else. You have that person to kind of hold you accountable, and you might even ask them, say, hey, I want you to ask me about this. I want you to text me about this and see if I'm doing it. And that can help you in your journey too. And maybe they would also be wanting to join you in that journey.
Very wise. And I like to tell clients to, when you think about a habit, what you're doing is creating change in your life. And we all know change is hard. And our brains sometimes fight back against change. So one way to frame this for yourself is that it's an experiment. And I liked how Kelly talked about trying it, right? You're experimenting with it. You're learning from it. You're not going to do it perfectly. And it doesn't have to last forever, right? If you learn, having done it for a week, that that's not for you, then that's an experiment and you don't have to keep doing it. I'm a researcher, so I like this language. But sometimes that takes the pressure off to say, I'm conducting an experiment.
Yeah, on myself.
Yep. Right,
Yeah.
right.
That's true.
Well, let's turn now to how we can compile some resources for ourselves and our congregation.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I've put together a mental health resource guide or flyer picture for you. On here, this is for you. This is also for your congregation. So I encourage you, as you're setting those boundaries, as you're maybe if you're sending out an email with your new office hours or whatever it is that you're doing, that you send this along with it. It has some different things on here. So we have crisis lines. This is really important for when people are in a crisis, when they're in an emergency and they need to talk with someone. Maybe they're having suicidal thoughts, or they're with someone who's having suicidal thoughts and they don't know what to do. These are good resources for them. So we have the different crisis lines on here. Obviously, if there's a physical emergency or a life-threatening emergency, they should go to the emergency room or call 911. That's not a pastoral emergency, right? So they need to be doing the right thing there. So we have New Mexico Crisis Line. There's Agora Crisis Center. And then there's also the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. And they also have a text line, because I know younger folks like to text instead of call. So those are options there. We also have some resources for if someone just needs to talk, right? You have someone who likes to call you and they just want to talk. But maybe it's outside of your office hours and maybe you don't have that other person that they can call. So we have some places that they can find help there. So there's a New Mexico warm line. So the warm line sounds like that. You call, it's just someone to talk to. It's not an emergency. It's not a crisis. You just need to talk through something with someone. So that's the warm line. And on here, it has the specific hours that they're open. They also have a text line. There's an Agora chat line. Okay. There's also there's some options for therapy. So betterhelp.com is trained therapists. It does cost money to do this. It's not free. But if you want to enter into therapy, or if you have someone in your congregation that you think might benefit from therapy, but they don't really want to go out into the world, or they don't really want to contact someone in the community for whatever reason, they can go to betterhelp.com, talk with a trained therapist there. And then call your insurance provider, right? Find out who, if you want to see someone in your area, find out who's in your network. There are therapists all over, everywhere. We're all using telemedicine right now, so we could easily see anybody. So I encourage you to call, and encourage your congregations as well to call their insurance, see who's in their network. Most insurance companies will pay for 6 or 8 sessions, and so that's usually really helpful for people. We also listed several apps. So there are a lot of apps out there. There are a lot of helpful apps for mental health. So some of them are about relaxation. Some of them are about tracking your habits. Maybe someone's dealing with an addiction of some kind that they want to help with. So therapy would be great for that, but also they can use an app to track their behaviors. Okay. So there's several of them listed there. Most of them that I listed are free. Some of them have a little bit of a cost associated with them, but they're really helpful. And I know that I always recommend a lot of these to my clients, and they find them helpful as well. And then at the bottom there, we have treatment centers. So this is for someone who is feeling extremely overwhelmed. They don't feel like they can do this on their own, or even in an outpatient type of way in a regular therapy setting. And they might need to go to a hospital to get some treatment. And that could be just for any mental health disorder, but it could be for addictions. I have a feeling that there are a lot of recurring issues with addictions during this crisis, because because people are losing jobs and they're losing income and they're feeling hopeless and they don't know what to do. And so they turn back to those old habits, or they increase their use of those habits that they have. And so we wanted to get this to you. I hope that you can use this and do use this. Please send it to whoever you want to send it to, and use it in that way. We want you to also know that we're open for your questions. We did record this ahead of time, but we want you to know that if you have questions, that we're available to you. So our names, our email addresses are going to be posted at the end of this little chat, so that if you have any questions, please email one of us, all of us, and we can answer those questions as best as we can. Anything else that you want to add before we close our conversation today?
I think I'm good.
Yep.
Okay.
Just very
Well, we want to thank
thankful
you
for all of the clergy who are putting in so much time, so much creativity in how we do worship, right? So channel some of that back to yourself as well. You deserve it.
Yes. All right.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. And I think we're done.